Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Max Verstappen on pole for the Canadian Grand Prix, but far from the only storyline of the day. Ferrari stealing the headlines again with another elimination early for Charles Leclerc. Another disaster class on strategy from their side of things with the tyres today in tricky conditions. But if there's any team to get it wrong, you can always count on Ferrari. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Quick breakdown actually of what happened in practice for this, because this is a late video, didn't get to do one earlier on today, but rain heavily affected this weekend already. Maybe there's going to be some in the race tomorrow, we'll see. But this was remarkable, right, during practice yesterday. FP1 was like, called off because of the CCTV glitches and issues they had. But FP2 started out completely dry and then finished as wet as I've ever seen a track this season. I'm kind of surprised they didn't straight up red flag it with the conditions Bottas was driving in. And it was Bottas P1 technically in the first session of practice because there wasn't any running. The second session though, it was Hamilton and Russell P1, P2. The Mercedes definitely looked competitive in the dry conditions. Part of this, of course, was the fact that Mercedes went out towards the end. They did their fast runs towards the end of the session. Most other teams did their fast runs towards the start. So track evolution made Mercedes probably look a bit better than they realistically should have done. But still, technically a 1-2 for Mercedes. This is the other data I wanted to look at from FP2 though. This is long run pace. Mercedes were way behind here, mainly because they did theirs earlier on. So, bit of discrepancy. So probably factor them out. But looking at the Red Bulls, Verstappen did a few laps, averaged about a 17.5. Alonso, yes, he only did 5 laps here, but technically he had the fastest split at a 17.49. It was then Perez, about 4 tenths off Verstappen, which is a very consistent trend at the moment. And then even Gasly in the Alpine was quite competitive, and Leclerc also did a 17.5 over many laps. So, and I think it was even Christian Horner that said earlier in the day, Ferrari are the key competitors to Red Bull this weekend in terms of the longer run pace and in terms of quali pace. Theoretically, that was where Red Bull saw the challenge coming from, was not from Mercedes or Aston, but was from Ferrari. And Leclerc's pace here in that stint, and yes, Red Bull made some improvements going into Saturday, there's no doubt, but the pace there was good enough to challenge for the win, theoretically, for Leclerc. That was what the simulation seemed to indicate, but of course, we got to Saturday and Ferrari had other ideas, and Leclerc was happy about it, absolutely, and nor should he be. Big update as well coming today that Bridgestone have actually officially submitted a bid to become the tyre supplier for Formula 1, the sole tyre supplier, from I believe 2025. So apparently this is a serious option to be considered to replace Pirelli, and the Pirelli tyres have definitely come under a lot of criticism over the last few years, and Bridgestone want back in. So we'll see, but that's another big story of the day. Couple of quick notes as well on the Verstappen situation, because he came into Saturday saying, well, their work on Friday was not good enough. They've got a lot of work to do. The car is not fantastic. We know our limitations with the car. Probably on the track like it is with the bumps and the curbs, it's not suiting our package. But you can always rely on Red Bull to make some improvements. They did for the wet. If it's completely dry tomorrow, who knows what we're going to get, because it was a very different feeling today in the wet conditions for many of these cars, especially the Mercedes, right? Hamilton is still enjoying the track, but he said after FP2 that the car, it's not great. It's, it's come see, come saw, I suppose is kind of what he was trying to say here. And he also mentions that it's still the rear end that's giving him trouble. Like the front end with the new suspension changes are okay, but there are no rear suspension changes yet, that they might try and do something. But yeah, still it's the rear ends and the rear limited nature of this circuit, which is probably exposing the Mercedes a bit. But he did say after FP2 they're more competitive. And even James Allison went on to say that, are they confident they can make this car a race winner? They are. Are they confident that next year they can fight for the championship? They are. So, he's not going to say anything else, but they believe there's further improvements to be made with this car. And there was quite some optimism with Mercedes going into Saturday based on what they had done on Friday. But when the rain arrives, it's a very different story. And Mercedes have been great this season, especially since the upgrade to Monaco, at protecting their tyres. Hamilton did like 26 laps on the softs at Spain. That was a feat not thought possible. It was only thought they could do 18. So the W14 definitely has some of the good traits of the W13 in terms of tyre preservation that the Ferrari certainly doesn't. But the flip side of that is, if you preserve your tyres well, it can also be more challenging to heat the tyres up and get them in the appropriate window to execute on. And that's what we kind of saw. FP3 was earlier on. Sainz binned it in the wall. he's had a bit of a disaster weekend, it's got to be said again. And yeah, obviously got back in the car and they could manage to save it, but it wasn't great. Leclerc was P2, Alonso P3. So this is what I thought going into quali was a pretty reasonable expectation for the front three places on the grid. The Aston was looking good, the Ferrari was looking good, Verstappen was probably going to stick it on pole. But of course, Ferrari had some other ideas on this one. Hamilton was not happy as well about the temperature into the tyres. They couldn't get anything going in FP3, like they were so far off the pace, and they said, all right, we'll try and make some setup adjustments for quali that could hold them back in the race, we'll see, but it's a bit of a trade-off. So FP3 finished with Verstappen P1, Leclerc P2, Alonso P3, and then a Haas, which is a kind of consistent trend at this point, with a Haas being relatively competitive. And even Toto Wolff said after practice, he was like, yeah, we took the Inter off the car and it just looked like it was brand new. So we put no energy into the tyre and need to work on the setup. Quali arrives and it's very interesting from the start because it's raining, and then the rain actually wasn't particularly heavy in Q1, and I was thinking, all right, this is going to get to slicks very shortly, and it did roughly halfway through Q2. Some teams were quicker to adapt than others. Zhou had a bit of an instant, his car broke down early on, De Vries, Gasly, Tsunoda all out, with Sargent as well, and this is then where the Alex Albon and Williams masterclass came in. They decided their best shot of getting into Q3 is to put a set of slicks on nice and early. They did that, Albon went out, got the track at the perfect time, and put in a lap that was good enough for P1. As soon as he put that lap in, the raindrops started falling, and every other team that hadn't yet put the slicks on was now really caught off guard. And this was the thing that Ferrari dealt with. There was plenty of time. There was probably a good 4 to 5 minute window where the slicks were the fastest tyre, and as soon as it started raining again, you know, even if you go back out on the Inters, you're not going to beat the guys that have done laps on slicks. There was a couple of guys, I think Hamilton and a couple of others, that got through with their time on Inters. Not everyone was able to do a quicker time, but most people were, especially with Albon putting it P1. So they got the timing perfect. But even if you came in a lap or two later, there was still time to put the slicks on. Mercedes were really slow to react as well. They thought that, well, there's more rain coming, let's just keep the Inters on. But, you know, the track was good at that point. A lot of the standing water had been cleared away. It was just about good enough for slicks, and that was the fastest tyre for a period of about 3 or 4 minutes. Ferrari, though, they have a bit of a predicament on their hands. They had the slicks ready to go, they put them onto Sainz for sure, and Leclerc at this point was just outside. He was a 10th off Hamilton at this time, he was just in there on their time on the Inters. Russell was further up as well, so they'd done decent laps on the Inters, but nothing spectacular. But then the rain was starting to leather it down, and Albon, like, nobody could improve on the slicks anymore, and they had to go back to the Inters. But Ferrari completely missed the boat with Leclerc to put him on the slicks. They had the chance, they could have done it, and he was on the radio just fuming. He was like, look guys, the tyres weren't ready. They should have absolutely brought him in to make the necessary change, and over the radio, Leclerc was not a happy man, and for very good reason. So Verstappen ended up getting pole. It was a crazy Q3 actually. It was kind of a shame the way it finished because the rain got heavier and heavier. And with Piastri putting it in the wall, there was no tyres to clear the water off the track. So it got heavier to such a point that there was no chance. But actually the red flag dropped just after Nico Hülkenberg crossed the line and just before Alonso did. Alonso would have put it front row, I believe. But Hülkenberg instead gets the lap. Verstappen had already done 2 at this point because he came out first, which was definitely the correct call. I'm surprised Mercedes had their guys going out last and they were a few tenths off. They probably would have improved with 1 more lap there because Verstappen was pretty much the only guy to put 2 laps in and he improved massively. But great lap from Hülkenberg. It's got to be said, man. This guy's been super impressive. Hamilton P4, Russell P5, and we will get to the impeding situation because we've got to discuss that too in a second. Sainz though, P8, another rough ride for him, and there was just no chance to improve. So, you know, bottle job from Ferrari for having a car that is arguably this weekend the second fastest to get P8, P11, and it might get even worse because of the potential grid penalties they might get. But it does feel like Leclerc has pretty much had enough at this point. Like, he is past defending these guys any longer. He says straight up, this time it wasn't difficult to read that it was a dry track. He actually said it. I'm pretty sure Leclerc said it on the radio. He was like, look guys, I think the slicks are the way to go here. I said it on the outlap. I don't know why we stayed on intermediates on a dry track. We went on slicks when it started raining. It should have been an easy session, so I disagree with the team. So straight up saying, the team was wrong, I was right. What are you playing at? You've messed it up again. And once again, a chance for Leclerc to stick it on the front row and have a good race. Gets blown away. Not not to say that he wasn't, maybe he could have put in a better lap on the Inters, but still, it's another Ferrari disaster class, right? And it's happening again and again and again. Just before we close out, wanted to mention the possible impeding punishments, because there were plenty of instances here. I will be shocked if Sainz doesn't get one, because I don't know what this guy was thinking. He was going into the chicane at like 20 miles an hour when there was 3 guys coming up behind him. He impeded Gasly, I think, very badly, actually. And there was plenty of other instances as well. Hamilton looked like he impeded Stroll into the hairpin, but I think it wasn't even investigated because there was so much else going on as well on the track with impeding stuff. And also, I don't actually think he affected Stroll's lap because they didn't touch and he didn't get in his way. Stroll, I don't really think, lost any time there. So I think he'll get away with that one. There's also an investigation for Williams failing to return the tyres of Albon and Sargent's cars, so I don't know what penalty that would be. Sainz impeding Gasly, Stroll impeding Ocon, and Tsunoda impeding Leclerc, and also apparently Tsunoda impeding Hulkenberg, so you might get a double penalty here. So, I mean, yeah, what an absolute mess. This is the starting order for now for Sunday's race. It's going to be really interesting. I mean, the Red Bull's going to win. Fair play. Congratulations, Max Verstappen. But outside of that, there's a lot of interesting storylines here, and I didn't even mention Sergio Perez so far, because you got to say with Sergio Perez, Verstappen's doing a killer job, no doubt. But that Red Bull is definitely one of the most dominant cars, if not the most dominant that we have seen for the last 6, 7, 8 years, right? Since 2014. Maybe even more dominant, right? Who knows? We'll see by the end of the season. But Perez has now been out in Q2 or Q3 in the last 3 races in a row, which is just straight up unforgivable, right? I mean, absolutely. I mean, he just was nowhere near the pace this weekend. Couldn't do it in any situation. And, I mean, yeah, like, as much as Ferrari were having a disaster class, Perez is, like, I mean, there's no championship contending going on here, right? I mean, that's got to be said at the very least. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.